Hey, welcome to the future of work. I think today's discussion is going to be interesting because we actually had a topic planned and I threw it straight out the window earlier this morning because I'd seen a pattern in recent conversations I was having. And the pattern was people struggling with how they're using their time. Time's an interesting topic. We all have the same 86,000 plus seconds in a day, right? And I think that's maybe the only thing everybody has in common is we all have the same amount of time. But how do we use it? What do we do with it? Where does it take us? And so my observations have been kind of interesting. I think everybody's struggling to a degree. Some people are trying to bring their work habits into the new environment and just kind of port them over and pretend like everything's the same. Some people are changing radically how they use their time. Some are doing better, some are doing worse, but it's an interesting topic to be sure. So I thought we'd explore it from the angle of, just working in a new environment. Are you going to change when you go back? Are you going to go back? Just how are you dealing with time? So with that said, Dan, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think this is an interesting topic. There are some people who have an abundance of time, and there are some people who are just getting crushed right now with the amount of work that needs to happen. And ultimately, I think how we respond in this moment will determine our success over the 30, 60, 90 days, or, whenever this situation subsides. So, it's a critical point. They say life is made up of decisions, and this is one of those moments where decisions really do matter, and how you invest your time is super important. So,
yeah. Dan, how are you doing personally? I mean, have there been a lot of changes, few changes? Have you made positive steps? Do you feel like you're sliding back? I mean, how are you doing just individually?
Well, on a work front, I think we've never been busier. We're doing all kinds of work and projects, and it seems like we're making sure that our marketing efforts are sensitive to the environment around us. From a personal front, I think I could definitely do a lot better. I think it's time to intentionally carve out time. I'm a workaholic, I guess you could say, and sometimes that isn't the best thing for anyone. For the mindset, you got to sometimes take that time and pause and reflect. I ordered an exercise bike. I was inspired because we were on a conference call with Mike the other day, and he's like, "Oh, I just did 2 hours on the treadmill." So I picked up an exercise bike. It gets delivered today. So hopefully I can start, enhancing my daily habits and getting a little more exercise in, being that the gyms are closed. Yeah. But all in all, very, very busy, and not a whole ton of idle time. I think I just need to reprioritize. And I think, there's probably a lot of people in that same situation.
Yeah. Blake, how are you doing?
Yeah, probably very similar. I would echo Dan's comments. From a day-to-day perspective, I would say that it's still quite busy with clients. We've had clients at various stages of that relationship and where they are in acquiring talent. So there's certainly that, but I would also, add on, this is a time too where for that extra white space that we have, we are looking internally as well, working through this. How do you emerge as a company and use this time to really leverage that and become that much better and thrive? So I would say from my perspective, that's what it looks like, at least from a professional angle.
Yeah. Nick, how about you?
Well, the first, thing that I would say is that when I joined N2 Growth, it was a transition from a traditional office environment where people were coming in 8:30 and leaving, right on the dot, like right at 6, right at 5:30. And moving from that to an relatively unstructured work from home environment, I found myself in the middle of the day, kind of thinking, oh, I have a little bit of a lull in my work. What are some things that I can do? Can I do my laundry? Can I go out, and do some errands or food shopping? And it's like, yes, you can. And so that kind of flexibility, at first it was a little uncomfortable and I didn't know what to do with it. But over time, I think I started ingraining like that flexibility into my work schedule. If I were talking to a lot of clients and people on the West Coast, they're not typically up, in the morning on my time in the East Coast. And so I'll sort of schedule around some of that and be flexible. And that just took a lot of getting used to. And I think a lot of people out there are trying to make that same transition and maybe are finding themselves with a couple hours to spare in the middle of their days, not knowing what they can do to be productive. And I think part of the answer to that is you don't always have to, find something else to do work-wise to be productive. Yeah. You can try to take care of some other things in your life and have that balance. So that's the first thing that came to mind when you brought up this topic.
Yeah. So I'm curious, if you compare where you sit today versus the environment that you came from pre-Into growth, where do you think you were more productive, in the old environment or the new environment?
Without question, it's this environment. I think there was that lull after lunch, the couple hours where you're feeling a little bit low energy and, you've been at it for a long period of time and maybe you went out for a short walk for lunch to go get something. But I feel like having that flexibility and being able to control your calendar in a lot of ways. And I know that some jobs you don't get to do that as much. But having that flexibility and autonomy, it just makes you incredibly productive. And I've realized that you can get a lot done in a shorter amount of time in this type of environment if you really prioritize and are thoughtful about scheduling. On the other hand, what I think some of the research is starting to show is that people are spending net more time, at work. So maybe I think it's Adam Grant who came out with, a combination of studies that said people are on average are spending 2 hours more a day on work in this work from home COVID environment. And maybe they're just stretching out the work day because they've got to accommodate things during the day. So maybe it's not that they're working on work for 2 more hours, but they're spending a greater portion of their day on work. And it sort of, emphasizes this need to be flexible and move in and out quickly.
Yeah, leave it to Adam to point out what we're doing wrong. I mean, he's great at gut checking us. It's interesting. 2 conversations this morning. One, I had a client say, I just don't know what to do with all this time. I kind of scratched my head and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Let's explore that. And then I had another conversation with a client that says, hey, I'm booked, every day from 6:30 in the morning until 8:30 at night. I'm like, that's interesting. Let's explore that. I was trying to peel back the layers on both of these people because they're both super dynamic, super smart, very successful, lead big teams, yet this is impacting them in totally different ways. And so as you think about all the transitions that are going on now and all the transitions that will be coming at us in the future, I think this is something that if people can get on the right side of this, I think life can be a lot better. I'll tell you, any transition that I'm a part of, I look at it as a chance to hit a reset button, right? It doesn't matter what the transition is. Whenever I find myself in that place, I try and just kind of lift myself up, look down and figure out, okay, can I do this better? Can I do this smarter? Can I have more fun doing this? Can I be more creative doing this? Can I produce better outcomes? Can I lead better? Can I be better, with personal issues? Like I'll tell you what, I was joking with somebody the other day. I have 3 wardrobes: in shape, out of shape, and way out of shape. And I'm working my way down to in shape, right? I'm trying to use this time better. I've picked up a couple of old hobbies again, and I feel like I've been more productive on the work front. And I think I'm more engaged on the home front. So at least thus far in the journey, I think that reinvention, reimagination has worked for me, not against me, but it's having different impacts on different people. I mean, Blake, any tips you would give folks? I mean, you spent some time in a missile silo, so you know what it's like to be relatively sequestered. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think even just outside of particular settings, one of the things that I've thought about, there was a leader when I was in the military. He said that, one of the strongest traits of any leader is this idea of discipline. And I think that even outside of the leadership position, discipline is really, really important. And in unstructured environments, especially where you're trying to bring together what was very discrete environments between like home and work, you have to now be able to live in that same environment and have the discipline in place to allow yourself to have the balance that you need. So for instance, we have a comment here from Dr. Jacqueline RJ, who sits as Assistant Commissioner of Administration for Children's Services, saying that, she's extremely busy in this current environment. When she commuted, she had a bit more time just to hear her thoughts. Now she wakes up in an office, right? Fully in workaholic mode. There's no separation of work and home. And so, the way that I see this is not uncommon. It's really, really easy for you to go sort of one of two ways. You can envelop your life completely in work because it's right there. Or, maybe it's harder for you to be able to get into work mode because, well, it's right here. I could go to my kitchen, I could watch TV. And that's a personal decision, right? There are some forcing mechanisms, but as I've spoken with clients, I just had a conversation with a client last week. He has never been in an environment where he's working from home. And he's just noticing how difficult that's been, especially when you compound it with pressures, with his natural proclivities, but also the fact that he does have a family that's there. There are a lot of different competing priorities. And, everybody has their own way of dealing with it. But in his case, he's making and setting aside time every single day to make sure he's breaking up his schedule. So he's not just fully enveloped all the time. And he's also using it to do some of the things that everyone here has spoken about, which is trying to use this time in a beneficial manner, both professionally and personally. And so for this individual, it's every morning waking up and allowing himself to get back into the habit of working out. So he does he's got a gym in his garage. He's able to start doing that this time of year, and he's doing that in the morning. During the lunch hour, he and his wife are making a concerted effort to go for a walk and clearing their head. And they're making it a point at 5:30 to stop what they're doing, try to clear their head. If they have to work a little bit later, that's fine, but getting together as a family and making dinner. And even something as small as those sort of steps that this individual is taking are really helping him to create the space and balance he needs in this sort of environment. And I think, again, it ties back to my earlier point of just having the discipline and the wherewithal to make sure that you're doing that.
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent points. I mean, I'm a big believer in operating frameworks, and that applies to this topic as well, right? I mean, I'm very consistent with routines that make me better, right? So I don't know about you guys, but I'm up every morning, 4 a.m. on the nose, and between 4 and 9 a.m., that time is just programmed for me. And it's programmed based on my understanding of what I need to do as an individual to set myself up for a successful day, right? And then I've got the day kind of program, but built into that program is some flexibility and some white space, and then the evenings are similar. And, you don't have to be a robot. You don't have to be a slave to that. But I find for me, that makes me better. And if I get out of that, it kind of just disrupts the flow of the balance of the day. I mean, do you guys get up early? Or are you night owls? I mean, Nick, how do you work?
Yeah, I'm typically on the later end. But one of the things that I heard recently is that there's this notion that we're more creative at certain times of day. We might be more creative in the mornings, or we might be a certain way, in the afternoons or in the evenings. And what the advice is that whatever, I guess, your natural tendencies are, try to do the opposite. This is a time for experimentation. If you find yourself wanting to set aside time in the mornings for creative exercises, try doing it late at night after the kids go to bed, for example, to see if that changes anything for you. And so this is a time where we can experiment with things like that to challenge your notions of yourself and how, those operating rhythms, are. You might have been waking up at 4 a.m. every day for the past decade, but
Yep.
maybe you're a really creative guy, after 10 p.m. and you just wouldn't know it otherwise if you intentionally sort of experimented. So that was an interesting thought exercise that I think more people ought to try.
The other thing too is you need to ask the people around you, about how they observe your behaviors, and when do they see you having the most energy, the most creativity, the most clarity, and listen to those people, because, we all have blind spots, and they're called blind spots for a reason. You can't see them. So, if you don't kind of let other people into your world, you'll probably wander down the wrong path. I mean, you might find your way back to the right path, but you're going to bang your head on a couple of branches along the way. So, Dan, are you early, late?
Usually I'm up every day at 7. I try to go to bed around 10 or 10:30. It's pretty straightforward. That's the routine. By the end of the day, I'm usually just pretty sapped. So,
well, I notice with you always have good energy, and that 10 to 7, there's a lot of sleep in there, right? Theoretically, if the kids aren't, running in the room, but,
right.
From 10 to 7, that sleep is huge, right? If you look at a lot of the data and a lot of the statistics, that's probably one of the things that most plagues us as a society, is just a lack of sleep and a lack of rest, because that's when your body rejuvenates, your mind, your brain. I mean, everything gets better overnight. And so if you're always pushing the limits, if you're burning the candle at both ends, it's hard to be at your best. I mean, Blake, how about you? Early, late?
Clear. I'm definitely an early morning person. I love the early mornings. I've realized that over my life that I do very well. Sometimes, you can't control it. If it's a late night, it's a late night for whatever reason it happens to be. Yeah. But I'm just unequivocally an early morning person. But look, if there's one thing that human beings as a species are really good at, is adaptability. You adapt or you die. And literally it could be that visceral, like it could be that stark, right? And so this is a new time for a lot of people. And like anything, right, habits can form over time. One must be adaptable to survive. And I think this is a great example of this, right? Like, this is a new environment. If you are fortunate enough to be able to work from home during this time, those who are adaptable will thrive. They'll make it work, right, on whatever way that happens to look like for you, and they'll get it done. And if you don't, then that's a serious problem that you're going to have to deal with down the line. But I mean, it's just one of those things. Find out what works for you, how that is able to be adaptable in the environment that you're operating in, and crush it.
Yeah. I had a conversation that was interesting the other day, because I've got a chief executive that I've been working with for about a decade. And one of the things that he likes to do is communicate very often. And he never switches off. And so you'll get messages from him, early in the morning, late in the evening, on the weekends. He's just that kind of guy, right? And it's worked really well for him, but it can be a source of frustration and aggravation for his team. And he's kind of maintained that communications volume and velocity through this transition. And, we had a really interesting conversation, and, basically it's like, look, stop. Don't do that. Give people some space, let people have some time, and you'll get more out of them. And intellectually, he knows that. I mean, he's a really bright guy, and he's not particularly a control freak. He's just really high energy, and he loves to, pump ideas out to the team. But, he's just got to back off the accelerator there. So I think, that's another transition I think people are having to make, is just kind of respecting people's boundaries maybe a little bit more than they did when they were squarely in the office. Any thoughts on that? Are you guys seeing similar things?
Yeah, I think there was an article that we just published on our blog that talks specifically about, maintaining balance while working at home. And I think as leaders, it's interesting. You can directly erode your culture and burn people out just by doing those super early morning emails and late night emails, because you have this, this team, and there's probably a certain amount of them that are workaholic in nature, and they will respond in real time. And that is just, that may not be the expectation from the leader, but they're going to do it because that's what they do. You know, like business is their sport. They're into it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they're, in it to win it. And, from a leadership perspective, just having that, consciousness that 7 p.m. email that could totally wait until 8 a.m. the next morning, you can schedule that thing to go out at 8 a.m. the next morning. And you've, given that evening, you've given a gift, I think, to that team member or employee.
Yeah. Go ahead, Blake.
I would say, I was just going to piggyback off of that. It's interesting though, right? Because there are some nuances here. Everybody has a little bit different working style. I think like this is an argument that we've been hearing about even like before this, because of like increased connectivity. Everybody has email on their phones, and it's like, well, we're more connected. You're getting this, the days where I can't even imagine, I've, never working in an environment where there weren't computers. Like I can only imagine what it would have been like before that time when there was a very clear, right? And some, there's a lot of benefits to that. There are a lot of drawbacks to that, as we well know. But I think actually what's really interesting now is it's not so clear cut really anymore for a lot of people with distributed workforce geographically. Like what 7 p.m. might be for you, Dan, might be 4 p.m. for somebody else, even within our own company, right? I work with Nick, and Nick's 3 hours ahead of me. And so I think there are a lot of nuances there too. And just communicating that, like in this new environment, like you might have had norms that you had when everybody was working in an office together, that those have been thrown out the window right now. And so it's really incumbent upon teams to make sure they're effectively communicating that. And then they're aligning on everybody's natural tendencies and what works best for their team. So during this time, if you receive a 9 p.m. or a 10 p.m. email or a phone call in a sort of dire circumstance, like that's understood that can happen, right? And certain nature, like if you're certain nature of work, if you're an iBanker and you're on a deal and that thing's still moving through in this environment, you got to close. Like everybody knows that you're going to be pulling late nights, right, to get that done. So it just depends. There's so many nuances, but again, I think what's clear in this environment is like the need for communication and alignment early on.
Yeah,
no, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, I think one of the things that I love about our team is that I don't really know anybody in this organization that isn't disciplined. I mean, people, and it's something that I think it's the type of talent that we look for, the type of talent that we attract, that the type of culture that we've created and are trying to create. But I don't really worry about you guys doing what you need to do. I don't feel the need to beam in. I will every now and then. I'm human. I mean, if I could probably pull back some of the messages that I've sent over time, I'd retrieve a few. There are times when I could hit the pause button that I don't, but I think, I'm trying to be conscious of that. And so I think if we all help each other be better with that, we'll get to a better place. Let's kind of shift to this whole future of work topic, because I think it's, I don't know, it's almost become trite in certain respects. I mean, it's the Industry 4.0 or the future of work, or however you want to phrase it. But what does it really look like to you guys? And I'm curious about that, because I saw something float down my timeline the other day. It was a webcast that's coming up, I think, later this week about the future of work. And there were 4 panelists, and all 4 panelists were over 60 years of age. And, I'm not an ageist. I mean, I'm an old guy, right? But I think about the future of work, and by the time some of the things I think about happen, I'm probably going to be 6 feet under, right? So, I mean, I think the future of work is largely in the hands of your generations. And so, it's nice to hear sound bites from guys like me that have a lot of experience, because we might be able to point to certain things. But in reality, we might shepherd the future of work, but you guys are going to usher it in. So I'm curious to hear what you think about the topic as a whole, what you think about it as it relates to time and how you use time. I mean, Dan, any thoughts there?
Well, I think, one of the biggest opportunities I think we have right now in this moment is to start building the skills of the future. And whatever industry it is you are in, I think there's going to be this constant need to upskill, reskill. I think the other day we talked about unlearning, and when you unlearn, you know, as a consequence, you learn, you know, because you're doing new things. And I think now, while people are at home, and if they do have, you know, some flexibility with, you know, that white space, that is probably one of the best things that they could be doing right now. You know, that's something that I'm doing in my time. And granted, I would put that into the work category, but I'm an autodidact just by nature. So I'm constantly learning, and that's how I recharge. And, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity, you know, with this, this crisis that we're in. I think the emergence of new skills and new industries, even though they may not really be clear right now, will be clear in the not so far future. And just being keenly aware of those things, that you can't really do that if you're just heads down, you know, in your work. You have to be aware, you have to be self-aware, you need to recognize those skill sets that you need to build on and optimize. So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, before I dive in and get Nick and Blake's topic on this, I do want to tap on one of the things that you said, and it's just white space, right, Dan? I mean, I think I'm such a huge believer in that, because I grew up as a very type A kind of guy. And, you know, I grew up before all this technology was kind of in place, and it was very meetings oriented. And so just back to back all day. And, you know, you'd have to go home at night to get your work done because you couldn't get any of it done during the day. And so I think over time, just by being a participant in the chaos, I learned the value of kind of ordering your world. And so white space is huge. I mean, you guys can see my calendar. I mean, every Monday it's out of office, right? I mean, I'm a no meetings Monday guy, and I've been that way for as long as I can remember, right? Because I think that tees my week up. I mean, that's my time to really sit down and plan and think and ideate and, you know, test some things. And so, you know, I don't sweat Sundays because I'm paranoid about Mondays. Yeah, it just makes things flow better for me. I mean, white space is just huge. I bake it into every single day, and I work really hard at getting all of my clients to do the same thing, because you get more done in shorter periods of time. I mean, I don't know if it's like a surge mentality kind of thing, but when I'm on, I'm on, and when I'm off, I try and be off. I don't know. Blake, thoughts?
Well, I will say that I'm going to be speaking with the forked tongue here, because I'm terrible with white space. I'm like you, I'm incredibly type A, and I don't know if that directly correlates with the fact of having to have something on the calendar all the time, but I'm not very good at it. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt, if you will. But, you know, there are a lot of people that swear by this, you know, somebody that really you know, there are some great examples out there. Somebody who's masterful at this is somebody like Warren Buffett. You know, he spends at least 5 hours every day just reading, and he's Warren Buffett. He can do that, I guess, but, and he's a special person, right? And we can have another conversation just on Warren Buffett. But I mean, there are people that live by this. There is something to be said for the research, talking about the importance of breaking up your time, right? Even this idea of having increased productivity after taking some paid time off, things of that nature, like it's super, super important. And, you know, I guess if you're in a position where you can, you know, dictate your schedule to where you can have like a full Monday off, or at least some semblance of white space that you bake in, I can't see that being bad, but I can see for people, at least like for myself, it's like, well, no, I should be doing something right now. Why do I have this white space? I should be working on something, or I should be prepping for this meeting, or whatever that happens to be. But that's sort of my thoughts on it. And so agree, see a lot of value in it, not very good at it.
Yeah, let's stick there for a second, because I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. It's like being busy versus being productive. And sometimes busy can make you productive, but sometimes it has the absolute opposite effect. And so I think, Blake, you are you are a production machine. I mean, I don't know that I've ever stumbled across anybody that just is as on as you are almost all the time. I mean, I'm not in your space, but I see the trail of your activity throughout the enterprise, and it's phenomenal. But I wonder, just personally, if you've put yourself into this routine, and I wonder what it would be like for you if you gave yourself space to say, hey, you know what? I'm not doing Mondays, or I'm baking in this amount of white space every single day because I'm a really smart guy and I'm super creative, and there are things that I can add value to in this organization that I can't if I'm just grinding on work. And so I don't know. That's maybe a little bit of a personal challenge to you, but I would love to see what white space would do for you, because as productive as you are, I think you would only become more productive, but I think you would be, I don't know, just maybe more inspired, right? Instead of just grinding, you can kind of step back and figure out if you're grinding on the right things for the right reasons. But, just a thought. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, similarly to Blake, I think if I see a big empty space on my calendar, I kind of want to fill it up with stuff. That's like my first inclination. And maybe the answer to that is to fill it up with things like read a book or, go, prep this thing for dinner or whatever. So I have that structure, but I'm doing things that are not work, that are sort of balance. And I think I'm not good at that, that white space mentality. I like to try to bring creative thinking and high level thinking to, day-to-day discussions. So maybe orient less towards the hard execution, nature that I think Blake and others in this organization have. But I'm the same way with white space. But I think when I've taken the time to structure my calendar in a way that's not just work, integrating my personal calendar and my work calendar together, I've seen a lot of value in that. And especially when I first started working here, that was huge to get me that right balance of work and life. But it had to be on my calendar, it had to be structured, because that's what I'm going back to all the time.
Yeah. We talked earlier about frameworks, and one of the things that I'm always doing is looking at the components of my framework, right? And trying to build in some elasticity, right? Because if it's so rigid, you're just going to bang into stuff all over the place. It's got to be flexible enough to breathe. But there has to be enough structure that framework actually has value. So, it's kind of a consistent exploration journey. But I think most of us, and I know you guys, you guys just work your backsides off, and I'm grateful for that. But I remember Dan Evans having a conversation with my son about you at one point in time, and we were saying, we got to get this guy to switch off. I mean, we got to, stop working, because you're just wired like that. And so, mostly I worry about you guys, because I think when I look at our team, I think we're way over rotated on the type A side here. And consequently, it's kind of a cool place. We get a lot of stuff done. We move mountains, we explore interesting things. But I worry about burnout for this team a bunch. That's one of the big things up here on my whiteboard is, trying to take tension out of the system. And I think if that becomes an acceptable topic, most organizations that employ people, they don't spend a lot of time talking about how to take things off people's plates and how to take tension out of the system and how to give them more freedom and time. But that's exactly what they should be talking about. Thoughts on that?
Some companies, are really, really good about that. This idea of having, the 10% time. I think Google was one of the companies that I think that's how they've come up with actually some really interesting products. They're products that we all use and love that have been a direct result of having this concerted effort of time away from the day-to-day to think and have the white space and innovate. So, it is something that's interesting. It's obviously valuable because it's led to like incredible innovations that we all have. But yeah, again, and in this environment, I think burnout is very real. Some of it is just natural. Some people they have a hard time creating barriers for themselves. Some people, to your point, Dan, earlier, they have a large part of their persona being wrapped up in their professional endeavors, and that's okay. Like, I don't think that's a bad idea. If you've invested a lot in yourself to get to a point where you're going to be working 40 plus years and you want to make that a large part of your life, and it takes up more of your hours than some other people who don't prioritize that, that's great. And maybe your bar for burnout is a lot higher than some other people. And that's okay. It just looks different for different people, but everybody will hit a wall at some point. And as leaders, it's your job to keep a pulse on this, especially in an environment where you can't swing by their office and check in, and you don't see them every day. And they are working from their living room, or they're working from their studio apartment that's also their bedroom, which is also their kid. There is no boundary there. And oh, by the way, like, I'm worried about my mother getting COVID, or, you know what I mean? Like, I guess it all just comes back to like, white space is great. It's awesome. It's super important. But like, leaders need to come through in this time and just be that much more communicative, and just have that much more of a view on things to keep a pulse and keep folks healthy on whatever that happens to look like.
Yeah. I would just add to that I'm speaking to some friends that have a lot of white space, right? And there's, especially for the creative types, there's this expectation almost, say you're in art school, there's this expectation that you come out of this environment with your greatest work, they cite, other famous artists as having created some of their most famous works, in periods of isolation, I think even some pandemics. And so that adds pressure and that adds stress to those people to feel like they need to create something or to add value with white space. So I think white space is important, and managers and leaders need to think about how to take things off the plate of their team and create that flexibility in that white space. But to have that expectation that you create something great with the white space, I think that is counterproductive, and it should try to be as free and loose as you can make it. I think the Google example is interesting because, it's easy to see a peer come up with a great idea during that 10% time and think that you need to come up with that too. And so it becomes almost like not 10% time, it's still work, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it comes down to expectations and white space, but like, what are you doing? Give someone free license to do it. Don't I guess come in with an expectation that if you give your team white space, they're going to come up with all these brilliant ideas that are going to change the world in a couple of weeks, kind of thing.
Yeah. So maybe like give white space with no expectation of a return.
Yeah.
And that way it allows them to really think about it. So something comes to mind. This is a very personal topic for me because, I have a problem with this. Hi, my name is Dan. I have a problem with working a lot. I put a sticky note up right above my computer. It says, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And that's one of those quotes that stuck with me over the years. I think Jim Rohn might have said it. And, really taking that white space and investing in me, learning something new. I subscribed recently to Masterclass and, been doing some culinary classes to just kind of try and do something different, like on the weekends, something that I normally wouldn't do. I think, a lot of people right now are using this time to cook and spend more time in the kitchen with the family, which I think is good. And for me, that was a refreshing break from doing what I normally do. And even though it may have been through the same medium, like watching a video and like learning how to do something, it was a different task and activity. And I think we all just need to, speaking of discipline, be disciplined about how we use our discretionary time and make sure that is a disciplined thing to do. Because if you wait until you're motivated, I think Jocko Willink has a quote. I pulled it up here. He says, don't expect to be motivated every day to get out there and make things happen. You won't be. Don't count on motivation. So in those moments, like for me, business is my sport, and I'm leaning into business because it's what I'm good at. and it's what I like to do. And it's something I'm comfortable with. You know, doing the other things like going into the kitchen and cooking, that took discipline to peel me away from this box that I'm sitting in here, in right now, and go do something different and engage with the family and, clear my head. So I'm not sure if you've had similar experiences like that, but this is definitely something that's very sensitive and relevant for me.
You know, it's interesting. I was listening to Blake earlier about, everybody has kind of their method of doing things, and it's not all going to look the same. And, I was just kind of thinking about, like, I'll just contrast two people. So let's take a guy like Gary Vee, right? I mean, that guy moves fast enough to make a cup of coffee nervous. I mean, he's always on. He's going 100 miles an hour. I mean, I can remember, you'd see videos that he'd post, at all hours of the morning, in a cab, on a plane, just everywhere, all the time, always on. And then you've got like a Tim Ferriss, the 4-hour work week kind of thing. And so, two really successful guys, wired differently, different approach. It has to work for who you are as an individual. But I think anytime you find people at either ends of the extreme, people that succeed at either ends of the extreme are the exception, not the rule. If you over rotate really hard one way or the other, I've seen that movie, and more oftentimes than not, I don't like the ending. But if you can figure out what balance looks like for you and make sure that that's wired in, that's where you're going to find your greatest success. I mean, hey, with the few minutes we have left, we're going to wrap a little bit early today because we've got some client commitments to take care of. But in the few minutes we have left, I just want to go around and just ask for, your best hack, right? What's your best time hack that's worked well for you? And let's just kind of share that. Nick, you want to start?
Time hack. In college, there was this tool that sort of, it was an application that basically counted down like a certain amount of time. And after, you spent that amount of time, I think it was like 90 minutes. You had to take a break. You just had to force yourself to take a break. And so I think there's so many productivity applications out there, like whether they're on your phone or your computer. Your computer is saying, hey, you've been on 5 hours straight of screen time, take a break. There are those things out there that I think people can leverage. I think personally for me, that is really important. I'm noticing that my eyes are more strained during COVID than normal. I'm spending more time in front of the screen. And so I'm actually looking at some applications that are going to help me reduce my screen time. My phone already tracks it. But that would probably be my advice.
Awesome. Dan?
Probably the best hack I've experienced is discipline. Just being disciplined and giving myself permission to just pause. I think that's my thing. So I need to do more of it.
Yeah.
But it works.
Yeah. Awesome. Blake?
I have a couple of forcing mechanisms, I guess, that would be sort of like my time hacks. Two things outside of work are really, really important to me, and they have been for a long time. It's reading. I thoroughly enjoy reading. The pursuit of reading and just knowledge is just something that gets me going. And staying physically fit. Those are two things. I think there are incredible benefits to both. And so I mentioned earlier, I'm an early morning person. I make it a point to wake up early every single morning so I can budget time to make sure that I'm reading. I have 2 papers I read every morning, and then whatever books that I'm trying to get through every day, I budget time for that reading experience, and I budget time for a workout experience. Right now, it's mostly on the running front. But in a normal circumstance, there's metabolic conditioning with weights and all these things. And so those 2 things in the way that I start my day create a forcing mechanism around productivity, around endorphins and things that just keep me moving, and are incredibly helpful for me from a timing perspective. And so that's sort of what I do to help.
Yeah. No, we're wired similarly there. I mean, I'm a reading addict, have been forever. And honestly, that's what stimulates most of my creativity is I'm amazed at the stuff that I can learn from a leader that was doing things 1,000 years ago, right? I mean, it's just, or somebody that's in a different genre or field or industry or pursuit altogether. And, I've always said, don't copy, create. But the copy part of it is kind of mimicking to learn and to evolve is kind of a cool thing. You don't have to, it launches you to that next place. And so, I mean, reading is, I couldn't agree more. I'm going to try and model myself after you on the physical side of things, because I give it the old college try, but I got to do better there. But my biggest attack, and I shared it the other day, kind of confessions of a chairman. I'm an app store junkie, right? I love to get in that app store, and I'm looking for anything that I can find that gives me time back in the day. And so, I mean, if I had a nickel for every app I've downloaded, that'd be a really cool thing. And so I've had to discipline myself to go back and clean out all that stuff, right? Because they all kind of look good and you start to implement them, and then you figure out that they're taking you over here or over there. But over time, I've found some pretty cool apps that have actually given me more freedom, more time. And, so as you look to the future of work, don't, it's what got you here won't get you there. There are new, better emerging things that you can incorporate into your world that add value to your world. So, kind of like the thing that you signed up for, Dan. I mean, I've been staring at that for about 2 weeks, wondering whether or not I should hit that button. But I think that's my hack: is look for things that give you time back that you can then spend more productively, right? Yeah. So I think that's a good place to wind us up. Dan, you want to sign us off?
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you got some value out of this, be sure to hit the like button, share it with a colleague or a friend, and we'll see you next week.
All right. See you guys.